They say the line between a $15 an hour warehouse drone and a corporate demon is just a hidden contract. At 4:30 in the morning on Black Friday, my manager threatened to destroy my life over a disaster he created. He had no idea the woman scraping garbage off his floor legally owned the entire commercial complex. He thought he was playing God with my paycheck, but he just activated the legal firing squad. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Faith Crawford. I am 36 years old. Right now, my reality is a symphony of exhausted sighs and the blinding glare of fluorescent tubes. It was 4:30 in the morning at the Omnitech Emporium, a sprawling fortress of consumer electronics and smart home devices located in the heart of Austin, Texas. The atmosphere in the back warehouse was violently oppressive. The air was a stagnant, suffocating blend of off-gassing new plastics, the sharp tang of ozone radiating from thousands of boxed gadgets, and the heavy, undeniable stench of human desperation. We were the night shift. We were the invisible workforce tasked with preparing the battlefield for the incoming retail apocalypse. I was dressed in the company-mandated uniform, a poorly stitched, neon blue polyester polo shirt that trapped every ounce of sweat against my skin. To anyone glancing in my direction, I was nothing more than a seasonal temp worker. I was just another disposable set of hands hired to haul 75-inch flat-screen televisions and massive, awkwardly shaped virtual reality kits across the cold concrete floor, and I was doing it all for a meager $15 an hour. The heavy steel double doors at the end of the loading dock swung open with a dramatic crash. Chad made his entrance. Chad was the 29-year-old branch manager, and he carried a large iced macchiato like it was an emblem of absolute authority. He was a walking monument to unearned confidence, despite the grime and dust of a warehouse on the busiest retail day of the year. He wore a painfully expensive, custom-tailored silk dress shirt. It was a ridiculous wardrobe choice that perfectly highlighted how disconnected he was from the actual labor happening around him. He spoke almost exclusively in hollow corporate jargon, weaponizing meaningless tech buzzwords to camouflage his own staggering incompetence. "Listen up, you rusty cogs," Chad shouted. Clapping his hands together, the sharp smack echoed off the high metal ceiling. He glared at me, then shifted his gaze to Mateo. Mateo was a terrified 19-year-old kid who had been painstakingly sorting video cables for the past 6 hours. "Today is Black Friday. This is our Super Bowl. We need to synergize our floor-level bandwidth and aggressively push those extended warranty key performance indicators. If you do not hit your attachment rate targets by noon, you are gone, terminated. I will not let a bunch of obsolete human hardware drag down my quarterly bonus pool. Do you understand?" Mateo nodded frantically, shrinking back against a pallet of smart speakers. I kept my chin tucked down, staring blankly at the scuffed toes of my steel-toed boots. I played the part of the submissive underling flawlessly. "Faith," Chad snapped. He pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "Get over to the main gaming display in aisle 4. I want the new Titan tier rigs unboxed and fully operational, all 30 of them. I want a blinding wall of colored lights hitting the customers the second those front doors unlock." I looked up, keeping my expression entirely neutral, carefully masking the sharp calculation in my eyes. "Chad, the electrical drops in aisle 4 are outdated. The main breaker panel in that sector cannot handle that much simultaneous draw. If we daisy-chain 30 high-voltage power supplies into those old, degraded power strips, we risk a severe thermal overload. It is a documented fire hazard." Chad stepped closer, invading my personal space until I could smell the sickly sweet vanilla syrup on his breath. He sneered, looking me up and down with absolute disgust, as if I were a stain on his pristine floor. "I do not pay you $15 an hour to play engineer. Faith," he hissed, his voice dripping with venomous condescension. You are a box mover. You are a 36-year-old woman working a dead-end temp job before sunrise. I am the manager. You will pivot your attitude, daisy chain those power supplies, and make that aisle look like a casino. Or you can walk out that door right now and try your luck flipping burgers at a drive-thru. Your choice. I swallowed hard, forcing my shoulders to slump in an exaggerated display of defeat. I let my eyes widen just a fraction, perfectly mimicking the desperate, cornered look of a woman who could not afford to lose her pitiful paycheck. Yes, Chad, I will do it right now. He smirked, taking a slow, arrogant sip of his iced coffee. He looked incredibly pleased with himself. He truly believed he held my entire existence in the palm of his hand. He reveled in the illusion that he was a retail god, effortlessly crushing the spirit of a pathetic, failed, middle-aged woman just for sport. I turned away from him and walked silently toward the gaming aisle. I grabbed a tangled mess of heavy black extension cords and knelt on the cold floor. With my back turned to my smug manager, I began plugging the monstrous, power-hungry machines into the woefully inadequate power strips, exactly as he had ordered. What Chad did not know, and what his towering ego would never allow him to suspect, was the secret buried beneath the frayed collar of my cheap uniform. Taped securely against my collarbone was a microscopic, military-grade audio transmitter. It was currently active, silently recording every single word, every abusive threat, and every blatant, illegal safety violation he had just commanded me to execute. The tiny red light blinked softly against my skin, completely hidden from the world. I was not just wiring a catastrophic electrical hazard, I was methodically arming a trap. The countdown had officially started, and the execution of my plan was absolute perfection. 8 months ago, the air I breathed did not smell of melting plastic and despair. It smelled of polished mahogany, expensive leather, and the crisp, high-altitude oxygen of a 50th floor boardroom in downtown Dallas. I was not wearing a sweat-stained polyester uniform. I was draped in a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my warehouse manager made in a quarter. I sat at the head of a massive conference table, flanked by 3 of the most ruthless corporate attorneys in the state of Texas. The path that led me to that glass-walled fortress was paved with betrayal. A year prior, I had been a senior executive at a prominent Silicon Valley tech firm when a massive multi-million-dollar logistics project collapsed due to the board of directors' own blinding arrogance. They needed a scapegoat. They chose me. I was publicly humiliated, stripped of my stock options, and unceremoniously fired. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They gave me a substantial severance package to ensure my silence. They assumed I would take the money and quietly fade into oblivion. Instead, I took every single penny, paired it with my intimate knowledge of corporate vulnerabilities, and transformed myself into an anonymous phantom in the commercial real estate market, operating through a labyrinth of shell companies and blind trusts. I began acquiring prime retail properties. My most recent acquisition was a sprawling, high-end commercial complex in Austin. Almost immediately, the parent conglomerate of Omnitech Emporium began circling like vultures. They were absolutely desperate to lease the entire space. They wanted to convert it into their grandest flagship store in the entire American South, a shining monument to their retail dominance. I knew Omnitech's reputation intimately. Behind their glossy marketing campaigns and upbeat commercials lay a well-documented, systemic history of vicious labor exploitation and a terrifying disregard for fundamental safety regulations. They squeezed their lowest-level employees until they broke, all to inflate the profit margins for their shareholders. I decided it was time someone squeezed back. They are aggressively pushing for the lease agreement, Ms. Crawford. My lead attorney, a sharp-featured man named Vance, stated smoothly as he slid a massive document across the mahogany table. They want the Austin location badly. However, they are attempting to negotiate the base rent down. I picked up my sterling silver pen and twirled it slowly between my fingers. Give it to them. Offer them a lease agreement at exactly 15% below the current market rate. Vance blinked, his professional composure cracking for a fraction of a second. 15%. With all due respect, that is practically giving away premium square footage. We hold all the leverage here. Why hand them such a massive financial victory? Because greed is the ultimate anesthetic. Vance, I replied, my voice echoing coldly against the glass walls. When corporate parasites see a number that drastically reduces their overhead, their critical thinking shuts down. They will be so blinded by the millions of dollars they are saving that they will rush the paperwork. They will not scrutinize the details. And the details are where I am going to slaughter them. I tapped the heavy, 200-page contract resting on the table. I want you to bury a specific stipulation deep within the document, drafted into the environmental safety addendums. Call it Clause 8C. Vance opened his notebook. What are the parameters of this clause? The wording must be absolute, I instructed, dictating the trap that would eventually snap shut on my future manager. The landlord reserves the right to immediately repossess the premises and execute a full facility lockdown without any prior notice or grace period. Upon the discovery of any improper storage of highly flammable materials, explicitly including lithium-ion batteries, that poses a direct, immediate threat to the structural integrity of the building or the safety of its occupants. My legal team drafted the document exactly as I requested. 2 weeks later, the legal director of Omnitech, a man so eager to secure his annual bonus by locking in a ridiculously cheap lease, blindly signed the 200-page agreement. He did not read the fine print. He swallowed the bait whole, dragging the razor-sharp hook deep into the belly of his company. The sword of Damocles was now suspended directly over their heads, held by a single, fragile thread. But having a weapon is useless if you do not know exactly when to pull the trigger. I needed undeniable, first-hand evidence of their negligence to execute Clause 8C without a prolonged, messy court battle. I could not rely on sporadic building inspections. I needed to be inside the beast. So, I forged a completely new identity. I stripped away my executive credentials, downgraded my resume to reflect a history of menial labor, and humbled myself to walk through the back doors of my own multi-million-dollar property. I applied for a seasonal job, willingly becoming a warehouse cleaner and inventory clerk at the absolute bottom of the Omnitech food chain. I descended into the trenches to personally orchestrate their destruction. The week leading up to the massive retail event felt like a slow descent into total madness. The regional directors were breathing heavily down the necks of every single branch manager across the state, demanding impossible profit margins and record-breaking attachment rates. The immense pressure caused whatever fragile grip my manager had on reality to completely fracture, to artificially inflate his branch's net revenue and secure a massive end-of-year performance bonus for himself. He made a catastrophic and entirely illegal executive decision. He drastically slashed the facility's operational budget by completely disabling the primary industrial cooling system in the rear storage sector. The Texas heat, even in late November, was unrelenting. The lack of ventilation turned the sealed, windowless concrete box of our warehouse into an absolute furnace. The air grew stagnant, thick, and suffocating. But the stifling heat was only the environmental catalyst for a much darker, man-made disaster. 4 days before the front doors were scheduled to open to the frantic public, a series of unmarked freight trucks arrived at our rear loading dock at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. Under the cover of total darkness, my manager personally oversaw the offloading of hundreds of unbranded, wildly unregulated electric scooters. He had deliberately bypassed official corporate supply chains and safety protocols to purchase this incredibly cheap, highly combustible inventory at a severe discount. Worse still, he ordered the exhausted night crew to stack the massive, heavy cardboard crates haphazardly against the rear walls. The towering walls of unstable chemical energy completely barricaded all 3 designated emergency fire exits. The ambient temperature in that cramped storage corridor rapidly spiked past 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The air grew thick and heavy, smelling distinctly of heated metal, ozone, and unstable chemicals. It was a literal ticking time bomb. and he was the one holding the match. While the rest of the terrified temporary staff blindly followed his reckless orders, fearing for their pitiful paychecks, I went to work, armed with a heavily modified smartphone disguised seamlessly as a standard heavy-duty warehouse barcode scanner. I documented every single violation. I took dozens of high-resolution photographs of the deliberately blocked emergency doors, the towering, precariously balanced pallets of illegal lithium-ion batteries, and the chaotic nests of overloaded electrical wiring that were already beginning to warp and melt from the oppressive ambient heat. I recorded precise digital logs of the internal warehouse temperature and the staggering humidity levels. Every photograph, every thermal reading, and every high-definition video clip was instantly encrypted and pushed directly to a secure offshore cloud server. That server was constantly monitored by Vance and my aggressive legal team back in Dallas. The evidence required to trigger Clause 8C was now absolutely indisputable. The trap was fully primed, loaded, and waiting. However, while diligently building my airtight legal case against the corporation, I stumbled upon a completely unexpected piece of personal leverage. During my covert surveillance of the loading docks, I noticed a very specific, carefully engineered blind spot in the facility's extensive security camera grid. The digital lenses covering loading bay door number 4 had been manually tilted upward by exactly 15 degrees, capturing nothing but the blank metal ceiling. Hidden in the deep shadows of that deliberate blind spot, I watched my manager systematically load dozens of high-end laptops, premium digital tablets, and incredibly expensive professional photography drones into the trunk of his personal luxury sedan. He was not just a violently negligent corporate tyrant. He was actively bleeding his own company dry, fence-selling tens of thousands of dollars in premium electronics on the local black market. The sheer volume of his brazen theft created a massive, glaring black hole in the quarterly inventory logs. I knew he was nowhere near smart enough to cover his tracks digitally when the corporate auditors eventually descended upon the Austin branch. He desperately needed a physical scapegoat to absorb the devastating blame. He needed someone utterly disposable, someone who supposedly lacked the financial resources, the intelligence, and the voice to fight back against his authority. He chose me. I watched him study me from across the warehouse floor, his eyes narrowing with a cold, malicious intent. To his arrogant mind, I was the perfect, pathetic victim. I was the slow, quiet, aging temporary worker who kept her head down and simply absorbed his abuse. He was actively laying the meticulous groundwork to frame me for grand larceny, believing I would go to prison so he could easily buy a new sports car. The night before the catastrophic sale commenced, the tension vibrating through the building was nearly suffocating. I stood completely alone in the dim, flickering light of the dilapidated employee break room, staring intensely at the glowing screen of my device. I opened a highly secure, heavily encrypted email client. I meticulously drafted a high-priority emergency alert addressed directly to the captain of the Austin Fire Department and the regional director of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. I attached the precise GPS coordinates of the blocked exits, the terrifying thermal imaging data of the degrading lithium-ion batteries, and comprehensive, undeniable photographic evidence of the imminent structural threat. I deliberately left the recipient fields blank, saving the fully loaded message safely in my drafts folder. All it needed was a single, gentle tap to launch a massive bureaucratic airstrike. My final act of preparation for the incoming slaughter had absolutely nothing to do with digital evidence or legal clauses. I walked silently to the rusted metal lockers assigned to the lowest-tier temporary staff. I opened mine and reached deep into a thick, protective garment bag. I carefully steamed and smoothed the fabric of my bespoke, dark navy blue Armani suit. I hung it perfectly inside the cramped locker, placing a pair of imported black leather heels neatly beneath it. It was the tailored armor of the incredibly powerful woman I truly was, waiting patiently in the dark. Tomorrow, the bloodless corporate coup would officially begin, and I absolutely refused to be wearing cheap polyester, when I finally burned his pathetic kingdom to the extremely cold ground. At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, the heavy glass front doors of the Omnitech Emporium were unlocked. It was not a grand opening. It was a violent structural breach. A massive, feral tide of humanity surged forward, entirely shattering the quiet dawn. The crowd poured into the main aisles like a brutal, unstoppable flash flood of consumer desperation. I stood near the main customer service desk, watching perfectly ordinary people instantly transform into savage combatants. They shoved aggressively against one another, throwing sharp elbows and trampling carelessly over fallen bodies just to claw their way toward the towering pallets of heavily discounted 75-inch flat-screen televisions. The sheer, overwhelming volume of the mob was absolutely terrifying. The corporate headquarters had mandated that aggressive, high-tempo electronic dance music be blasted continuously through the overhead speakers to artificially stimulate a sense of panic and urgency, that relentless. Pounding bass collided violently with the ear-piercing shrieks of dozens of anti-theft alarms being triggered simultaneously by frantic, grabbing hands. The entire store was transformed into a chaotic sensory slaughterhouse. The physical atmosphere on the showroom floor was rapidly degrading into something deeply dangerous. Because my manager had intentionally and severely throttled the main industrial cooling system to aggressively pad his own bottom line. The sheer body heat generated by thousands of hyperactive shoppers had nowhere to safely escape. The air grew brutally thick, heavy with the suffocating stench of nervous sweat and cheap, overpowering cologne, but lurking beneath the foul human odor, a far more sinister scent began to aggressively permeate the stagnant, sweltering air. It was the distinct, acrid stench of burning plastic and superheated copper wiring. The massive banks of gaming computers I had been forced to daisy-chain together were drawing a monstrous, unsustainable amount of unregulated electrical current. The ambient temperature in the display sector was climbing dangerously toward a catastrophic thermal threshold. The entire building felt exactly like a giant. Pressurized lungs struggling desperately for a single breath of clean oxygen. Right in the dead center of this terrifying, consumerist earthquake, the public address system cracked sharply to life. My manager's voice echoed loudly over the deafening roar of the rioting crowd, ordering me to report immediately to the rear administrative management office. I abandoned my assigned post near the front registers, weaving with great physical difficulty through a violent altercation between two grown men physically fighting over a deeply discounted kitchen blender. I pushed heavily against the solid wooden door of the management suite and stepped into a completely different, highly insulated universe. The chaotic, deafening roar of the sales floor was instantly muffled by the expensive, heavy soundproofing of the executive walls. My manager was sitting squarely behind his massive faux mahogany desk, while his exhausted employees were outside literally bleeding and bruising themselves to protect his inventory. He looked completely relaxed and utterly detached. He was casually leaning back in his expensive ergonomic leather chair, his right leg bouncing up and down in a rhythmic, deeply arrogant display of restless energy. He did not look like a man actively managing a massive retail crisis. He looked exactly like a highly satisfied predator who had successfully cornered his chosen prey. Without saying a single word of greeting, he picked up a crisp, professionally printed document and violently slapped it down onto the center of his desk. He tapped his manicured index finger aggressively against the signature line located at the very bottom of the page. I stepped closer to the desk, looking down at the stark black text. It was a legally binding corporate confession statement. The document explicitly detailed that through my gross personal negligence and staggering incompetence as a temporary warehouse clerk, I was directly and solely responsible for the sudden disappearance of exactly $40,000 worth of premium electronic merchandise. It was a perfectly constructed, entirely fabricated legal lie designed specifically to completely shield his massive black market theft from the incoming corporate auditors. "Sit down, Faith," he commanded abruptly, his voice dripping with absolute sickening superiority. "We have a massive problem, and you are going to fix it for me right now." I remained standing, keeping my posture entirely neutral and my hands resting quietly at my sides. I do not understand what this document is supposed to represent. He let out a sharp, highly mocking laugh, shaking his head slowly as if he were dealing with a particularly slow, remarkably stupid child. Do not play dumb with me. The regional inventory auditors are arriving next week. My back warehouse is bleeding high-end stock. Premium laptops, photography drones, digital tablets, gone, completely vanished into thin air. Someone has been exceptionally careless with the security cages during the late-night shifts. According to this official document right here, that someone is you. I have absolutely nothing to do with any missing corporate merchandise, I stated calmly, locking my eyes directly onto his face. He leaned forward heavily, slamming both of his palms flat against the wooden desk. The relaxed, arrogant demeanor completely vanished, instantly replaced by a vicious, snarling, cornered aggression. It does not matter what you actually did. It only matters what I tell the corporate office you did. I am the branch manager. You are a highly disposable, zero-skill temporary worker. I am offering you a massive personal favor right now. If you sign that piece of paper, taking full legal responsibility for the inventory loss due to your sheer stupidity, I will show you mercy. I will quietly terminate your employment today, and I will keep your final 2 paychecks to cover a tiny fraction of the damages, but I will not call the police. You get to walk out of this building without heavy steel handcuffs on your wrists. I stared at him in absolute, unblinking silence, letting the sheer, terrifying audacity of his extortion attempt hang heavily in the cold air of his office. He foolishly mistook my cold silence for paralyzing fear. He smiled, a cruel, incredibly ugly twisting of his lips, and decided to push the psychological knife even deeper into my ribs. He wanted to completely break my spirit before I signed my life away to save his career. Just sign the damn paper, you absolute loser, he spat loudly, his voice dropping into a vicious, deeply hateful whisper. Take a good look at yourself. You are 36 years old, wearing a cheap, sweat-stained polyester shirt, hauling heavy garbage for $15 an hour. You have no real career, no future, and absolutely zero power in this world. You do not have the money to hire a lawyer to fight this in court. Who do you honestly think the corporate executive board is going to believe? Who do you think the local police will believe? A highly respected, top-earning senior manager, or a pathetic, middle-aged warehouse cleaner who cannot even follow simple directions? Your word holds absolutely no weight against mine. You are nothing. Sign the paper right now, or I will personally ensure you spend the next 5 years rotting inside a state penitentiary. He shoved a cheap plastic pen forcefully across the smooth surface of the desk. It clattered loudly against the wood. Stopping right in front of the typed confession letter, he leaned back in his chair once again, crossing his arms tightly over his expensive silk shirt, waiting expectantly for the inevitable tears to fall. He was eagerly waiting for the frantic, humiliating begging. He was fully waiting for me to shatter into a million broken pieces right in front of his eyes. I looked down at the plastic pen. I looked at the terrifying legal document that was specifically designed to completely destroy whatever was left of Faith Crawford, the temporary worker. And then, very slowly, I raised my head and looked straight into his dark, impossibly greedy eyes. I did not shed a single tear. My hands did not tremble in the slightest. My breathing remained perfectly even and highly controlled. Instead, I simply smiled. It was not a warm, submissive smile. It was a cold, terrifying, utterly dead-eyed expression. It was the smile of an apex predator looking down at a very stupid, loud animal that had just willingly walked directly into the center of a steel jaw trap. The absolute, chilling certainty radiating off my face caused the arrogant smirk to instantly vanish from his lips. He instinctively stiffened in his expensive leather chair. A sudden, deeply primal flash of absolute panic flickered violently behind his eyes. For the very first time since the moment we first met, he suddenly realized he was sitting in a locked room with something incredibly dangerous. Before he could open his mouth to demand why I was smiling at him, a sharp, incredibly violent sound tore right through the thick soundproofing of his executive office walls. It was a loud, aggressive popping noise, followed immediately by the terrifying, cascading sound of shattering glass and screaming customers. It came directly from the main sales floor, specifically from the heavily overloaded virtual reality experience aisle. The degraded, ancient electrical wiring had finally surrendered to the massive, totally unregulated thermal overload. The main circuits had violently shorted out in a massive shower of sparks. A thick, highly toxic black plume of electrical smoke began to rapidly fill the multi-million-dollar showroom. The ultimate conflict had officially reached its explosive peak, and my trap was finally springing entirely shut. "I will never sign that piece of fabricated trash," I stated. My voice was no longer the quiet, submissive whisper of a defeated warehouse clerk. It was the sharp, resonant, completely undeniable tone of a woman who commanded international boardrooms. Chad's face turned violently red, a sickening shade of crimson that clashed horribly with his expensive tailored silk shirt. The distant, muffled sound of screaming customers and the thick, toxic smell of burning plastic seeping under his door did not snap his brain back to reality. Instead of addressing the massive electrical fire currently destroying his multi-million-dollar showroom floor, his fragile, heavily inflated ego shattered entirely over my blatant defiance. He snatched his smartphone from the desk with wildly trembling hands. "You are completely done," he screamed, his voice cracking loudly under the intense strain of his own uncontrollable fury. "I am calling the local precinct right now, and I am calling the building security team. I am having you placed in heavy steel handcuffs right in front of the entire staff. You are going to a federal prison for grand larceny. You absolute failure of a human being." He violently punched the numbers 911 into his glass screen to summon the emergency dispatch. I did not beg for mercy. I did not flinch. I simply turned my back on his pathetic, shrieking temper tantrum and casually walked out of his office. The small employee locker area was situated directly adjacent to his glass-walled executive suite. The chaotic noise bleeding through from the main floor was incredibly deafening out here. The heavy metal fire doors separating the back warehouse from the showroom were physically vibrating from the sheer, terrifying force of the panicked mob rioting on the other side. I reached my assigned metal locker and pulled the cheap combination lock open. I reached up to my collar and aggressively tore the Velcro backing off my ugly, sweat-stained employee identification badge. I did not just toss it away, I threw it forcefully into the open garbage can. Listening to the deeply satisfying plastic clatter as it hit the very bottom, I unbuttoned the disgusting neon blue polyester polo shirt and let it drop straight to the cold concrete floor, revealing a crisp, white, incredibly high thread count silk blouse underneath. Then, I reached deep into my protective garment bag and slid my arms into the flawless, dark navy blue Armani suit jacket. The heavy, perfectly tailored Italian fabric settled onto my shoulders like an invincible suit of modern armor. I reached into the interior breast pocket and retrieved a thick, heavily textured legal envelope secured tightly with a bright red wax seal. Through the glass wall, I could clearly see Chad screaming frantically into his phone, aggressively demanding my immediate arrest. He looked up, fully expecting to see a terrified, weeping woman fleeing frantically for the back exit. Instead, he saw a completely different, infinitely more powerful entity staring directly back at him. Before his tiny, arrogant brain could even begin to process my sudden, dramatic wardrobe transformation, the heavy steel double doors leading to the exterior loading dock were violently kicked open. The massive physical impact shook the structural concrete of the walls. It was not the local beat cops he had just demanded. It was a highly coordinated tactical invasion. 4 massive men dressed in heavy, dark yellow, heavily reinforced fire-retardant bunker gear marched aggressively into the back warehouse. Their heavy rubber boots thudded against the concrete like a rhythmic military drumbeat. They were led by Marcus, the seasoned captain of the Austin Fire Department, who was carrying a heavy steel breaching tool resting casually on his shoulder. Directly behind the firefighters marched 3 federal inspectors from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They were dressed in full tactical hazard gear, carrying thick metal clipboards and highly advanced digital environmental sensors. Chad dropped his phone. It clattered loudly against his smooth mahogany desk. He stumbled awkwardly out of his office, his face a pathetic mask of utter confusion and completely misplaced authority. "What the hell is going on back here?" Chad demanded, attempting to puff out his chest and project his rapidly failing dominance. "Who authorized you people to enter the secure loading bay? I am the senior branch manager of this facility. That woman standing right there is a criminal. Arrest her immediately." Captain Marcus did not even break his aggressive stride. He stepped directly into Chad's personal space, using his massive physical presence to completely dwarf the arrogant, trembling manager. Marcus roughly shoved Chad's pointing arm out of the air. "Shut your mouth and step back against the wall," Marcus ordered, his voice a booming, terrifying baritone that completely drowned out the distant wailing fire alarms. "We are absolutely not here for your petty employee disputes. We received an emergency, high-priority federal mandate directly from the legal owner of this commercial property. We are executing an immediate shutdown protocol for a Class A structural hazard. This entire building is a certified death trap." Chad blinked rapidly, his jaw going entirely slack as his brain short-circuited. "The building owner? What are you talking about? My corporate headquarters did not notify me of any sudden structural inspections." I stepped forward, my imported Italian leather heels clicking sharply against the cold warehouse floor. The piercing sound cut right through the heavy tension in the room. I walked directly past Captain Marcus and stopped mere inches from Chad's violently trembling frame. I raised the thick legal envelope and slapped it violently against the dead center of his chest. He reflexively grabbed it with both hands before it hit the floor. "I did not notify your corporate executive office because I absolutely do not report to them," I said, my voice dripping with absolute, freezing contempt. "My name is Faith Crawford. I am the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of the holding company that legally owns this entire commercial complex. Every single square inch of concrete beneath your expensive leather shoes belongs exclusively to me." Chad completely stopped breathing. His entire body froze perfectly in place as the terrifying, crushing reality of my words physically struck him. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin looking exactly like a sick, pale ghost. The arrogant, untouchable retail god was instantly reduced to a terrified, utterly defenseless little boy. "If you had bothered to actually read the massive lease agreement your greedy legal team signed 8 months ago," I continued mercilessly, "you would know all about Clause 8C. It explicitly grants the property owner the absolute, undeniable right to immediately terminate the lease and seize the premises without warning if highly hazardous materials are improperly stored on site. By illegally hoarding hundreds of unverified, highly combustible lithium-ion batteries directly against the primary emergency fire exits, you have violated severe federal safety laws and completely breached your contract." I took a slow, highly deliberate step closer, backing him right up against the cold glass wall of his own office. "I am officially revoking Omnitech's lease agreement right here, at this exact second. Your grand flagship store is permanently closed." Chad opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak escaped his tight throat. The rusty cog he had relentlessly abused, the aging, pathetic woman he had sworn to utterly destroy, was currently holding the absolute power of life and death over a massive multi-million-dollar corporate asset. He was completely trapped in a cage of his own making. But I was not quite finished with him yet. Slaying the rabid beast was simply not enough. I needed to permanently salt the earth where his career once stood. "And since you were so incredibly eager to involve law enforcement this morning," I said smoothly, reaching into my tailored breast pocket and pulling out a small, heavily encrypted black flash drive, I tossed it lightly through the air. One of the federal OSHA inspectors caught it effortlessly with a heavily gloved hand. "That digital drive contains high-definition, meticulously time-stamped video evidence of this specific manager systematically smuggling tens of thousands of dollars in premium electronics out of the rear loading dock, I announced loudly to the authorities. I looked slowly back at Chad, offering him one final, absolutely devastating smile. When you furiously dialed the police just now to falsely accuse me of theft, you actually summoned the authorities to arrive and handcuff you for grand-scale corporate embezzlement. Congratulations on playing yourself perfectly. Chad's knees physically buckled under the crushing weight of his absolute ruin. He slid slowly down the glass wall, collapsing into a miserable, pathetic heap on the floor. His perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess. His expensive silk shirt was completely stained with nervous sweat, and his entire professional life was permanently destroyed. At that exact beautiful moment, the building's emergency public address system roared to life. A loud, aggressive automated siren blared continuously, followed immediately by a harsh robotic voice commanding the immediate, mandatory evacuation of the entire premises. Through the heavy metal warehouse doors, I could clearly hear the enraged, deeply disappointed groans of thousands of greedy shoppers being forcefully pushed out of the building by the incoming tactical fire crews. The massive, highly anticipated retail event was entirely locked down right in the absolute middle of prime Black Friday shopping hours. The cash registers went completely dead. The chaotic aisles were rapidly emptied of all human life. Omnitech's aggressively projected massive revenue for the absolute most important retail day of the entire year was precisely zero. I stood victorious and entirely immaculate over the smoking ruins of his miserable little empire, watching the flashing red emergency lights paint his terrified face. The legal trap had snapped completely shut, severing his arrogance from his reality, and there was absolutely zero chance of mercy. 3 days after the doors were padlocked, the sheer weight of the consequences hit the corporate headquarters like a massive, unstoppable avalanche. Because my legal team had submitted an airtight, heavily documented federal complaint, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration did not hold back. Omnitech was publicly hit with millions of dollars in severe safety violation fines. The Federal Labor Board aggressively stepped in, legally forcing the conglomerate to pay out massive sums of back wages and heavy punitive damages to every single employee they had systemically endangered. When the news broke on the national financial networks, their publicly traded stock completely plummeted, erasing a staggering amount of shareholder value in a single afternoon. My former manager faced a much more personal apocalypse. He was completely stripped of his title, unceremoniously fired, and immediately indicted by the district attorney on multiple felony counts of grand corporate embezzlement. His name was permanently cemented onto a massive industry blacklist, ensuring that no legitimate retail chain in the entire country would ever hire him to manage so much as a cash register. As for Mateo and the rest of the terrified night crew, I made sure they were completely protected from the blast radius. I personally wired each of them a massive severance package out of my own private accounts. Furthermore, I leveraged my extensive corporate network to place every single one of them into secure, highly paid entry-level positions at my partner logistics firms. They never had to haul heavy boxes in a dangerous, sweltering warehouse again. Exactly 6 months later, the massive commercial footprint that used to house a terrifying consumer slaughterhouse had been entirely transformed. I leased the massive square footage to a progressive tech incubator. It was completely renovated into a stunning, state-of-the-art interactive art exhibition and collaborative co-working space. The heavy windowless concrete walls were torn down and replaced with massive panels of reinforced glass, flooding the entire facility with warm, natural sunlight. The suffocating smell of ozone and burning plastic was replaced by the rich aroma of freshly roasted artisan coffee and the quiet, productive hum of creative professionals working safely in a completely secure environment. On a particularly warm Tuesday afternoon, I stepped out of a high-end espresso bar located right next to the new complex. The brutal Texas sun was beating down hard on the hot pavement. As I walked toward my gleaming black Porsche Panamera, A sudden flash of bright yellow caught my eye from the opposite side of the busy street. Standing on the dirty sidewalk, right next to a greasy fast food drive-thru, was a man wearing a deeply stained, completely ragged mascot suit shaped like a giant taco. He was desperately waving a cheap cardboard promotional sign at the passing cars. The heavy costume head was pushed back, revealing a face completely drenched in miserable sweat. It was Chad. He looked absolutely destroyed. I unlocked my car. The headlights flashing sharply, the sound caused him to look across the wide street. Our eyes locked for one long, silent moment. I did not smile. I did not offer him a single ounce of pity, nor did I shout any words of cheap mockery. There was absolutely nothing left to say. I simply slid behind the leather steering wheel, calmly slipped on my dark designer sunglasses, ignited the powerful engine, and drove away. I left the former tyrant completely trapped in his own pathetic, inescapable reality. The universe had simply course-corrected, and everything was finally put back into its proper, absolute order. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.